Today's daf, we're going to be learning a Sanhedrin daf Kaf Gimel. Today's daf is dedicated in memory of the three IDF soldiers who fell in Gaza: Nevo Fisher, Matityahu Yaakov Perel, and Kanau Kasa. Nevo was a friend of my daughter. He's a Chram Baruch. We're going to get started today with the third chapter of Sanhedrin. First of all, just to know, it's a very central chapter. It's one of those chapters. Okay, we get to every chapter in Daf Yomi, but not when you learn in yeshiva or in schools. They don't often get to a lot of the chapters. This is a very central chapter, and we're going to learn it. It happens to be one of my favorites. We're going to start, okay, and I'll already preface today's shiur by saying there is a lot, if I haven't made that clear, of unclear, like a lack of clarity about this Mishnah. Okay, what this Mishnah is talking about, you're going to see that the Gemara struggles with what the Mishnah is talking about. The Amoraim really struggled. The Rishonim struggled with how to understand the Amoraim, and all the way to modern day times where we have a lot of academic discussion. The academics have a lot to say about this Mishnah. Okay, there's at least 10 or more scholarly opinions about what on earth is going on here. Okay, so with that kind of up in the air introduction, let's get started. So the Mishnah starts off very much like the first chapter, which is kind of interesting. It starts off with Dinei Mamonot b'Shlosha. We deal with monetary law in a court of three. Okay, we already know that. Okay, but it seems like we're now going in depth. Okay, so we started with how many the first chapter was courts and how many people do you rule in cases and for what, right? 23, 71. Then we got to the second chapter, which was all about the structure, the executive branch, we have the different rulers. How does that interact with the court system? If you haven't listened yet to Din and Daf, it's a great summary of that went up yesterday of the chapter and kind of perspective on it. And now we're getting into, okay, so how does it work, Din and Mamano? And we're going to have three machlokot between Rabbi Meir and Chachamim, each one more surprising than the next, I would say. So let's start. זה בורר לו אחד, וזה בורר לו אחד, ושניהם בוררים להם עוד אחד. The simple reading of this is, okay, whether echad, it's unclear, and you're going to see the Gemara immediately thinks that echad is a court, okay? But even if you don't understand it that way, sounds like this one chooses one, that one chooses the other, so one judge or one court, and then together they choose the third. Now, if I had asked you before today's class, how do you think it worked in the days, of the Mishnah when they went to the court, you would assume, I have an issue with you, I demand you go to court, and we go to the court that was in our town. We find a court of three if we're dealing with monetary law, and we go to the judges. All of a sudden, this sounds a little like a jury, like everybody chooses, they're who they want. It's, a little different. Jury's a little different, but, with jury, they question, sides can disqualify, which was going to be the next part of the Mishnah. What are we talking about here? Is that the way the courts worked? All the courts, Dini Mamano, work like this? Everyone chooses the judge? What happened to, these Dayanim we always hear about? Rav Nachman, Shmuel, they went to his court. I could choose who I want. Seems a little bit weird. And in fact, there's a huge debate, particularly among the academics, about whether we're talking about a regular court system, or most of them say, no, this is not the regular court system. This was an alternative court, and it was called, some call it the Beit Din of Borarim. Okay, it's like an arbitration court. And that there were different tracks that you could choose. You could choose to go to a regular court. You could choose to go to an arbitration court. We're even going to see in the Gemara, they suggest later that there was something, maybe this is talking about Erka'ot Shebasuria, which unclear exactly what that is, but it seems like some other sort of court system. So the academics play on this and say, yes, there must have been an alternative court system, but it begs the question, well, then why are they only talking about the alternative? Why aren't they talking about the regular court system? So either you claim, well, it's obvious what a regular court system is. You go in front of a judge. You don't need, right? You go to the Beit Din, you go to the mumchim, whether it's one mumche, remember we learned yachid mumche could be instead of three mumchim, and maybe it just doesn't even need to be said. But it's a little bit difficult to understand that they're talking about some alternative without even giving us the background to there's some alternative court. I looked at some article this morning that suggests actually that it's like a newer way. I didn't get to read through. It was a 46-page article, but he suggests that it actually, and his research is based on researching the Roman system of law, which was, they were in rule in Israel at the time. And that the Roman system of law, he basically goes along the lines that there were two different tracks, but that this was the main one. And this was the main way the courts were ruled in the Roman court, and then tries to prove from there, that this was the main way, and maybe that resolves some of the difficulties. Anyway, I just wanted you to know that there's a lot of ink spilled over this Mishnah. And what are they talking about? And not just this, but the next few Mishnayot, what kind of system is this? Is this the main system? Is it an alternative system? Is it, something that, okay, but there's a lot of questions about it. We're going to put that aside and we're going to now learn. So the first machloket is who chooses the third one, okay? Third one, whether it's court, third judge, okay? So each side chooses one, and then according to Rabbi Meir, shneim borim lahem od echad divrei Rabbi Meir. So the two litigants get to choose together the third. So each one has one they choose on their own and one they choose together. Again, could be one court, it could be one judge. We'll get back to that. The rabbis say no. They each choose one, and then the people who were chosen choose the other one. Okay, what's the reason for this? We'll get to this in the Gemara, at least what the Gemara thinks the reason for this debate is. Like, what's the source of the debate? Next, so there's three parts to our Mishnah. Ze posel dayano shel ze, v'ze posel dayano shel ze divrei Rabbi Meir. וחכמים אומרים, מתי? בזמן שמביא עליהם ראיה שהם קרובים או פסולים. אבל אם היו כשרים ומומחים מפי בית דין, אינו יכול לפסלה. So Rabbi Meir says, if I don't like your judge, I can cancel, and say, I don't want your judge. This is like jury, right? Jury selection. One side could say, I don't want that jurist. And the other side could say, I don't want that jurist, right? You'll pay lots of money to have help with, how to choose the proper jury to get the outcome you want. So according to Rabbi Meir, you can just disqualify them if you want. And according to the rabbis, well, I agree that you can disqualify, he says, but matai, in what case? Only bizman shemivi aleim raya. You have to bring a proof. What's a proof in halacha? Two witnesses that say that they're krovim or they're psulim. Okay, those are all things we're going to deal with in the rest of this chapter. What are krovim, who are relatives that are disqualified to testify? What are psulim, who are people who are not acceptable in court? But if you can testify that either they're relatives of the other side or they're disqualified witnesses because they aren't believed for whatever reason, we'll get to that. But without any evidence, you can't just say, I don't want that person to be the judge. If they were kasher, okay, meaning not a relative, not disqualified, or mumchim, or they were expert judges, mipi beit din, right? They were experts according to the court, you can't disqualify them. Okay, now here the surprising opinion really is Rabbi Meir. How does Rabbi Meir just allow you to discredit a good judge, right? On what basis? According to the rabbis, if you have a basis, okay, this judge happens to be the father of that person, right? Obviously. But without real reason, or they're a thief, or, they've taken things like that. Third section, even more surprising. Zeh posel edav shel zeh. Okay, why is this more surprising? Rabbi Meir says I can disqualify your witnesses. Okay, judge, if I disqualify, we'll just put another judge in place of that judge. Witnesses, that could be the only witnesses you have. By what power do I have to disqualify your witnesses? And we'll see in a minute that it's going to be the same thing. The rabbis are going to say only if they're really disqualified, but not if they're not, which means Rabbi Meir thinks I can just randomly disqualify your witnesses if I want. So zeh posel edav shel zeh, zeh posel edav shel zeh, divrei Rabbi Meir. Each side can cancel out the witnesses of the other. You can imagine this case would make a mockery of the court. I want to bring witnesses. You want to bring witnesses? Well, I can cancel yours. You can cancel mine. Okay. How are we going to have a court system like that? When can you cancel the witnesses of the other side? If you can bring proof to witnesses that say they're relatives of the person or they're disqualified, they're not kosher witnesses, then fine. But if they were ksherim, of course you can't disqualify them. So you can already see why a lot of ink was spilled over this Mishnah. Very, very confusing. Again, we have a whole bunch of questions. Number one, what kind of courts are we talking about? We're talking about regular courts, not regular courts. That's number one. Number two, Rabbi Meir in the second two parts is very unclear. How does he allow for this? And we're going to start with a different question, which I kind of alluded to, but the way the Gemara first understands the Mishnah is that Ze borer lo'achad means each one chooses a court of three. So comes the Gemara and says, "My ze borer lo'achad ze borer lo'achad bitzlata sage." Okay, they say, and I should just preface this by saying almost every line we're going to read today has multiple interpretations in different ways. Okay, I'm going to try to go with one way of teaching this because otherwise we will never end today's daf. But just know that there's multiple commentaries to many lines. There's different girsaot, there's different versions, variations of some of the texts, and some things flip things on its side. It's a really challenging but also fascinating because if you learn it in depth and you see the different approaches, you can see where they're coming from. But I'm going to try to keep it simple and go each time with one interpretation because otherwise we'll never get out of the daf. So my zeborer lo'achad zeborer lo'achad bitzlat asage. So it should be enough to have three judges, right? First of all, the Mishna says dina mamona b'shlosha. Now, if you choose three judges and I choose three judges, and then according to Rabbi Meir, together we choose another three judges, that gets us up to 9. So we don't need 9 judges for Dina Mamona. We just said Dina Mamona b'shlosha. So the first answer is Hachi Kamar. This is the way to read the Mishnah. Okay, they add 2 very important letters, okay, which change the whole meaning of the Mishnah. This isn't the way we do it every time we go to court. And you can see that the Gemara was also struggling with what kind of court is this? What do you mean? I choose, you choose, then we all choose. It seems very strange. What is, they say, if we have a disagreement and and you chose 3 and I don't like your judges and I say no thanks, and I choose my 3 judges and you say I don't want those judges, then shnehem borim lehem od echad. Then the way to deal with it is if I disqualify your judges and you disqualify mine, then the 2 of us together have to choose 3 judges. Okay? Or, according to the rabbis, the 2 courts that we chose, okay, I chose 1, you chose 1, well, the 2 courts, or maybe 2 judges, 1 from each court, because he does say Shnei Dayanim, would then choose the 3rd. Okay? Now, the Gemara says, so they don't change what I suggested before, which is maybe it's not talking about courts. It is talking about courts, but it's talking about a situation where I wasn't willing to accept yours, you weren't willing to accept mine. So how do we deal with that? We do this. By the way, I didn't mention this, but one of the explanations given for this Mishnah is perhaps if you say, where do we get this idea of a Beit Din shel borerim, right? We never heard of such a concept. But we did hear about pshara, if you remember, compromise, and perhaps this is more like a compromise court, and that the pshara that we mentioned earlier, maybe that's what this is talking about, because it does have more of a sense, right? Pshara, we kind of called an arbitration, and maybe it's the same thing. Other people say, well, then they'd say pshara here, right? It should be more clear if that's really what they're referring to. Anyway, it's, they especially, it starts off with dina mamono, as if we're talking about courts and not pshara. So again, it's a big question. But, okay, so now they say, okay, so we're going to change the wording. We're going to say it's kishe in the event that this is happens. This is how we proceed. Rabbi Meir says this way. The rabbis say that way. So now the Gemara has, the first question the Gemara has is like, afilu love matzeh ma'akev? Wait a minute. The Mishnah sounded like each person could basically, according to this, I could cancel your court, you could cancel mine. But if that's the case, even a love, even a borrower, now what's the difference between a borrower and the lender? Well, remember, we talked about this before, that when you take a loan out from someone, you basically subjugate yourself to them. And at that point, you basically say, right, I mean, if we have an issue, I'll cede to you. Now, cede to you what? Well, let's say you say, I say I paid you back, and you say, you didn't pay me back yet, well, we'll go to court. But you have the upper hand because you did something nice for me in the end, right? We might have a disagreement right now about whether I paid you back or not, but you did something nice by lending me the money. So we're going to read right now. It sounds like if I'm the borrower, I could also knock out your judges. But Hamar Rabbi Elazar said, Lo shanu el malve, aval love kofino tovedam bi'iro. The malve can force the love to go to a different city to go to court. If the malva says, this is where my judge is, I want to go there, the malva can insist. But the love cannot insist to take the malva to a different city to go to court. So that would sound like they also can't right? The lova also can't, it would sound like the lova can't disqualify the witnesses of the other because that's going to make the malva go somewhere else to court. So they answer just like Kida'amar Rabbi Yochanan Be'erkot B'Surya Shanu, just like Rabbi Yochanan explained somewhere else, which we're going to see later. That Rabbi Yochanan explained our Mishna talking about Erkot B'Surya. Now, what is Erkot B'Surya? It sounds like some non-Jewish court, but not clear that it's non-Jewish. But he says, and this is where the Gemara already gets to Rabbi Yochanan already seems to say there's some alternative system of law, okay, or alternative court system. So Rashi explains again what this is the good question. There could be different interpretations. Rashi explains, Shelo hayu b'ki'im b'din Torah. These people weren't judging people by din Torah. They weren't knowledgeable Torah scholars. They were judging based on logic and all that. So in that case, if the malva brings the lova to an erka'ah b'Surya, the lova could say, I'm not willing to be ruled in that court. That's not a din Torah. That's not, right? They're not knowledgeable people in what Torah law is. I'm not willing to go there. And perhaps, so just like Rabbi Yochanan explained a different thing, which we're going to see later, hachanami, we can explain the same thing here, be'erka'ot b'Surya shanu. Aval mumchim lo. So answer number one is, this is an alternative kind of court, and therefore even the lova can say no. When Rabbi Elazar said the lova can't say, I'm taking you to a different court, lova can't do that, that's an irregular court system. But if it's this erka'ot b'Surya, then not. Rav Papa gives a different answer. Rav Papa says, Afilu tema mumchim. Rav Papa wants to stick with, we're talking about a regular court, regular, excellent dayanim. Still, the lova can say no. Well, how does that work in with Rabbi Elazar, who said the lova can't insist they go to a different city? Obvious answer, Kigon beidina de Rav Huna de Rav Chisda. Well, it's like the court of Rav Huna and Rav Chisda, which were in the same town. So Rav Huna had his court, Rav Chisda had his court. Then the lova can insist because you can say to the malva, I'm not making you go any farther. It's still in the same town. And then the lova can insist. Okay? And that's a separate explanation. However, we're now going to have a bigger problem. So that was one question we had that we resolved either by saying our Erkot B'Surya or it was in the same city. And that was just a question about a lova. How can a lova also do this? Because again, the Mishnah didn't say only the malva. But now the Gemara is going to have another problem, which is Tanan. It says in the Mishnah, if we go with this interpretation, right? If you choose one court, I choose one court, one we call a herkev of dayanim, one group of judges, you choose another group, we each don't want the judges of the other, then together we choose one, and according to the rabbis, the two judges, the two batei din that we chose, choose the actual one that we're going to use. So it's a bit of a problem to say that. The two courts or two of the judges, let's say one from each herkev, however you read that. But if you're going to say it was talking about a beitin, if we each disqualify the other's court, it doesn't make sense that disqualified judges are now going to choose the actual court. That doesn't make any sense. So even though maybe you could say, but okay. But they don't like that. And furthermore, they're going to get to the problem of how to read this. My zeborer lo achad v'zeborer lo achad. The Mishnah doesn't say kishe zeborer lo. The Mishnah says zeborer lo and zeborer lo, as if this is the way we do it. Not if it happened this way and each one canceled the other. No, it didn't sound like that's what the Mishnah was talking about. So we're rejecting this interpretation entirely, and we're going to a second interpretation. And here there's a big problem because there's a problem with the girsa, okay? Because otherwise this really doesn't make sense. Elahachi kamar, and you see there's an aleph there. The aleph takes you the Hagahot Bach, at least by me it's an aleph. Hagahot Bach was the Bach for Biol Circus in the 1700s. He made a lot of corrections to the text of the Gemara that was in front of him. And he takes out the letters kishe, because the whole problem was it's not kishe when this happens, but this is what you do. And it should read as zeb borerlo. Now he changes. Number one, he gets rid of the kishe. Number two, he gets rid of that. We're talking about a beitin. He says zeb borerlo dayan echad, v'zeb borerlo dayan echad, u'shnehem borerim lehem od echad. How do the three judges get chosen? You choose one judge, I choose one judge, and then together we choose the third judge. And then the Gemara is going to say, why would we do it in that way? Well, very obviously, and notice where they're getting their answer from. Amrei b'ma'arava in Israel, and by the way, this whole sugya is an Eretz Israeli sugya. We're going to see. So we're going to have a major question today that's going to be answered in 4 different ways. We'll get to 3 answers today, 1 tomorrow. I think in the end there's four, from what I remember. Yeah, I think there's only four. And they're all Israeli scholars, okay, Israeli Amoraim. So they say in Israel, Mishmei de Rabbi Zera, it was quoted in the name of Rabbi Zera, Mitoch shezeh borir lo dayan echad, v'zeh borir lo dayan echad, u'shneim borim lehem od echad, yetzei hadin la'amito. This is the way to find the proper balance. You choose one, I choose one, and then again, whether you're Rabbi Meir or the rabbis, whether in a minute we'll get to what's the root of their debate, whether the two judges, according to the rabbis, or according to Rabbi Meir, the two of us together choose the third, but that makes for a balanced judgment. And then this is the way to choose judges. Now, again, even if you go with this interpretation, it might be the way to choose judges in this type of court. Okay. Not necessarily every time people went to court, they chose their own judges. Okay. This could be, like I said, again, nobody really knows, but this could be like an arbitration type court, whatever you might call it, but a different track. And again, whether it was the main track and there was another track, or whether it was a side track and the main track was really what we imagined before we got to this chapter, which is you go to, Rav Huna, Rav Chisda, those kind of rabbis, and there's already a beit din that's already set up there. On the other hand, we've seen lots of times that the Gemara calls a beit din any three people, and theoretically it could be that really was very common. So again, that's a question we're going to leave open. Chachamim omrim. Now we're going to try to figure out what's the machlokah between Chachamim and Rabbi Meir. Again, Rabbi Meir says it's the two litigants choose the third, and the rabbis say it's the judges. Nema, let's suggest, which is always rejected, let's suggest that Rav Yehuda Amarav Kamifged, that the root of their debate is whether or not they accept the statement of Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav. Now again, they lived before, but the point is, right, this halacha probably existed before. Did they agree with it or not? To Amar Rav Yehuda Amarav. Witnesses don't sign on a document unless they know who's signing with them. Okay, I would never sign my signature unless I knew who was going to sign below me. Okay, I always check because I don't want to be associated, right? If I'm signed on this document with someone else and they happen to be a terrible person, I don't want to be associated with them. So likewise, now, what does this have to do with anything? We're not talking about witnesses here, we're talking about judges, but it would be the same for a judge. A judge is not willing to sit on a case unless the judge knows what other judges they're sitting with. And Rabbi Meir, lately to Rabbi Yehuda Amarav, Rabbi Meir doesn't hold by this. And that's why the judges, I can choose one, you can choose the other, and the two of us together could choose the third. Even though the judges don't know who that third is going to be, they're already willing to sit on the court, even though they don't know who the third is, and they have no power over choosing that third one. That would be Rabbi Meir. Whereas Chachamim, itlahu, right? Rabbanan, itlahu to Rabbi Yehuda Amarav. They hold by Rav Yehuda Amarav. Judges won't sit unless they know, and therefore they have to be involved in choosing the third judge. So that's what the Gemara thinks, but the Gemara is going to say, lo, that can't possibly be, because no one would disagree with this statement. Of course, judges won't sit without knowing who the other judges are, and therefore it's a kuleami ile to Rav Yehuda Amarav. So here comes already, right? We already had some changes or potential changes from what we thought the simple reading was, or what the Gemara thought the simple reading was, and changed it a little. That wasn't a beit din, it was a dayan, even though you could just say that was more a simple reading anyway. But here we're going to really change Rabbi Meir and the rabbis. We thought that the two litigants choose according to Rabbi Meir and the two judges choose according to the rabbis. Now we're going to learn it a little bit differently. Dad hadayanim kol ya'amalu pligi d'be'ina. Even Rabbi Meir thinks the judges need to be involved in the decision. When Rabbi Meir said the Ba'alei Dinim choose the litigants choose the third one, they meant ki pligi da Ba'alei Dinim. They only were arguing about you also need the litigants to be involved. Rabbi Meir savar da Ba'alei Dinim nami be'inan. You need also the judges. Who chooses the third judge? The two judges are already chosen. Obviously, they're involved in the decision. But the question is, do you also involve the two litigants? Okay, so Rabbi Meir says you need to involve both. Again, each for their own reason. You need to involve the judges because the judges won't sit on a court unless they know who the third one is. So they're not going to agree to be judges at that early stage when I chose one and you chose one. Then like they agreed, but they didn't know who the third one is. Well, they won't do that unless they're going to be involved in choosing the third. But the question is, Rabbi Meir says also the Ba'alei Dinim get to be involved. He felt that was also important. They want to be, it's important that they each have what I would call buy-in, right? They are part of the decision also, and therefore it's all about accepting the authority of the judges, right? They'll accept the authority of the judges if they were involved in the choosing. For Rabbanan Savre, Data dayanim be'inan, da ba'alei dinim lo be'inan. The rabbis say, no, they each choose their own, and then those two judges choose the third. There's those two judges choose the third because otherwise they won't sit in the court without knowing who's going to sit with them. But you don't need the ba'alei din. No. Why not? So some people explain that the reason why is that if you let the Baalei Din get involved, and this happens sometimes on big trials and jury, it could take forever. Each side, like let's say, okay, imagine you claim I owe you money. Now I don't want to pay you the money and I don't have the cash in hand. So what will I do? I'll just keep knocking out the judge. I'll just keep saying no, 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 and ein l'davar sof, right? So the rabbis say, we're putting an end to this. We're not going to have, they call it inui hadin. Inui hadin is torturing the judgment, torturing the other person by pushing off, pushing off, pushing off. And therefore, no, you don't have any involvement. You get involvement in choosing your one, but after that, you're done. Okay, next. Gufa. Now we're just going to go a little off on a tangent, and then we're going to get to the real big sugya. So Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, we already had the statement. We're now going back and going a little bit in depth. Right? So we said the witnesses don't go, right? Don't sign unless they know the other one. So now we're going to learn a braita about this. Tanya Namihachi, braita to support this. This is what the Nikiyei Hadat, the very how you define what Nikiyei Hadat, but very literally means the clean of mind people, but these are like the very special people in Jerusalem. This is what they would do. Lo, you can do a search in Safari and see where they're mentioned in other sugyas. They come up in other sugyas. Lo yuchotmim al ashar elam ken yodim yichotem imahem. So that we saw. Okay, Edom won't sign unless you know who they sign with. By the way, this shows that what Rav said was already existing in the time of the Tanaim, which is why we said probably didn't disagree about this. Okay, the issue of judgment comes up here explicitly. They won't sit to rule as a judge unless they know who's going to sit with them. And they wouldn't sit in a meal unless they knew who was going to sit and eat with them. That's even a totally different situation that you should also be careful who you choose to eat with. Okay, now we're going to the basic main part of our sugya. Okay, now comes the big question. One big question which then leads to a huge question. What right does someone have, according to Rabbi Meir, the litigant, to just passel a dayan and say, oh, I don't want your dayan? Okay, by what basis can they do that? So Amar Rabbi Yochanan, this is where Rabbi Yochanan said it. In other words, if it's like Rav Nachman, right? I can't just come along and say, Rav Nachman, I'm not willing to rule in front of you. But if it's this Erka'ot Shebasuria, some, non-Torah scholars who are creating a Beit Din, I can say, I don't want your judge. Okay, that's possible. But not if they're mumchim and they're expert judges. But the Gemara says, wait a minute. That doesn't work with the wording of the Mishnah, because what does it say in the Mishnah? Hamidikatani Seifa. V'chachamim umrim. Now, pay close attention to the words. The rabbis responded to Rabbi Meir by saying the following. Ematai, when is it true what you said? Bisman shemevi ra'ayah she'em krovino psulin. If you can bring a proof that they're relatives or disqualified. Here comes the big line. Aval, but im ayu kshirim, if they were kosher witnesses, o mumchim mipi beitin, or they were experts in Eichel Poslan. Now, if Chachamim say, but if they were experts, you can't. That means Michlal de Rabbi Meir mumchim nami kamar. It sounds like Rabbi Meir thinks you can do mumchim, because the rabbis are saying, I disagree with you. So how can we explain this? We're going to have an explanation. Hachi kamar. He didn't really mean kshirim or mumchim. What he meant, what the rabbis meant was hachi kamar. Im hayu kshirim na'asu kimumchim mipi beitin ve'neichel Poslan. If they were valid people, there was nothing wrong with them technically, then it's as if they're mumchim and you can't disqualify them. And that's what the rabbis are saying, but not that mumchim. Even Rabbi Meir thinks mumchim can't be disqualified. You're asking, aren't all judges experts? No, that's the point. We're talking about these Erka'ot Shebasuria. Erka'ot Shebasuria, they weren't experts. They were random people that formed a Beit Din. Okay? Now, the Gemara says, wait a minute, Tashma, how can you say that Rabbi Meir said that? Because there's another source that says in this conversation between Rabbi Meir and the rabbis, a different Tanaitic source, Amrula Rabbi Meir, they said to Rabbi Meir, Lo kol imenish posel dayan shemumcheh l'rabim. How can you possibly cancel this dayan? It's an expert in public, like a public, expert. Ema, they say, no, change that source. And there it seems clear the rabbis are disagreeing with Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir seems to say you can disqualify. So ema lo kol hamedrash just posel dayan shehimchu rabim alehem. Okay, imchu rabim alehem is a different category. That means people accepted them to be a judge upon them, but not that they were actually experts. Tanya Namihach, here's a bright to sport Olam Posel Volech Ad Shekabel Beitin Shemumche LeRabim Divrei Rabbi Meir. And here they assume Beitin Shemumche LeRabim means, right, you can continually, according to Rabbi Meir, you continually disqualify them until, right, unless they accept upon themselves a Beitin Shemumche LeRabim that's already mumchim. If they're mumchim, you can't disqualify them. And that seems pretty clear. So Rabbi Meir doesn't allow mumchim. So we've resolved that issue for the moment. So that issue is resolved. We're basically going to say, okay, can't possibly be Rabbi Meir thinks we can disqualify mumchim, no way, no how, and we've just proven that. However, here comes the big question. But what does Rabbi Meir say in the third section? You can disqualify witnesses. So comes the Gemara and makes this analogy. Experts for judges is like two people for witnesses, right? Because two witnesses, al pi shnei idim yakum davar. The most, right? What's an expert when it comes to witnesses? Two kosher witnesses. So, ha'edim kemumchim dami. V'amar Rabbi Meir, zeh posel leidav shel zeh, v'zeh posel leidav shel zeh. If Rabbi Meir is not willing to pass a mumchim, then how does he allow you to pass two witnesses? Two witnesses are like mumchim. So, and like I said, we could have asked the question differently. How at all does he allow you to pass witnesses? But especially if we think he doesn't allow you to pass a mumchim, which we just proved, all the more so, he's not going to allow you to pass witnesses. So we're going to have 4 explanations for this. 3 we'll see today. That's going to be the rest of our daf. Ha'itmar Allah, but wait, it was said about that, right? So I read the whole thing. Okay. Amar Rish Lakish. Rish Lakish said about this Mishna. Okay, now you're going to see. This got people very upset. Peh kadosh yomar davar zeh. The holy mouth of Rabbi Meir said this? No way, no how. Okay, remember Rish Lakish, Israel, first/second generation. Tane Edo, change it to one witness. Okay, so now the Gemara says, Edo Lamai. What are we talking about? One witness for what? If you're saying it was a Dina Mamono case and they canceled one witness, Rahmana Pasli, the Torah apostled one witness. One witness isn't acceptable in court. I don't need to disqualify your one witness. Your one witness can't come to court. Ila Shvua, well, one witness could allow me to take an oath that if I really want to get something from you, right, he could force me to take an oath. Well, then we're back to square one. For oaths, one witness is perfect. One witness is like a mumche. How can I disqualify your one witness? So the answer, la'olam lamamon. It is lamamon. Lo tzricha tekiblei alei kebei trei. The case is where you said I'm bringing one witness, and I said, you know what? I'll accept your one witness. And now we're learning also some other things that we're going to get to in the next Mishnah, that, and perhaps also in this alternative system, we can make agreements. Okay, I can say, oh yeah, I know usually this isn't acceptable, but I'll accept it. And then what's Rabbi Meir saying? After I accepted that, I can renege. I can change my mind. And that's how we'd have to understand this according to Rish Lakish. It would be one witness that I accepted, and I said, I don't mind if you just bring one witness, I'll accept it as if it's 2, and he can testify for you. But then I changed my mind. So the Gemara says, wait a minute. Problem because of the next Mishnah. My kamashma, what's coming to teach? That Rabbi Meir says you can change your mind, and the rabbis say you can't change your mind once you accepted it. Well, that would be okay, but Tanina, it already says that in the next Mishnah. Because the next Mishnah says, and again, multiple interpretations, maybe we'll talk about it tomorrow when we get to this Mishnah. Is this Mishnah talking about judges or witnesses? Okay, either which way we can understand how the Gemara goes. If I say, I don't mind if your father's the judge, okay? Or my father's the judge, or 3 ro'ei bakar are the judges, okay? And we accept this upon ourselves. Rabbi Meir omer yachol lachzor bo. Chachamim omer yachol lachzor bo. Okay, so there they have the same machloket. Can you change your mind or not? Turning now to Amud Bet. Va'amar Rav Dimi b'reid Rav Nachman b'reid Rav Yosef kigon dekiblei alei b'chad. Okay, Rav Dimi explains this Mishnah as saying it's a case where, like the Abba case, where you said the father will be one of the 3 judges. Okay, why we need this line is a big debate. It depends how you understand the Mishnah. I'm not going to get into all this right now, but the main point here for our purposes is, let's just assume the Mishnah is talking only about judges and not witnesses. Some people think the Mishnah is talking about witnesses also, but let's just stick with judges. This was talking about judges. And it basically said, if you accept someone who's generally disqualified, but the other side says, I don't mind, then they accepted it. And according to Rabbi Meir, well, since anyway it was disqualified from the first place, if they change their mind, they could change their mind. And the rabbis say no. Well, that's basically, again, equating, doing the comparison, the analogy to witnesses, it would be the same thing. If you said, I'm going to accept one witness, or I said, I'll accept your one witness, and then I changed my mind. So then this Mishnah, is no different than the next Mishnah. It's the exact same idea. Okay, now the Gemara is going to say, no, it's not. And then we can establish Rish Lakish like this. Later, we're going to reject Rish Lakish entirely. But right now, we think we can still establish it. Sricha. We're now going to distinguish between somebody who accepts the father of one of the litigants as the judge versus someone who accepts one witness to be like two. Why? Because the father can be a perfectly good judge in a different case. Just not in this case, because he's nogea b'davar, right? He's partial. But one witness being like two will never be accepted. Again, yes, for shvua, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, to make me pay. One witness will never be accepted like two in any court case. Ema modele Rabbi Meir. Maybe the rabbis in that case, because it's less strong, the rabbis you would think would have said, oh, in that case, you could change your mind because it's really not something acceptable at all. Whereas a father is a good judge in other cases, just not here, but a valid person could be a judge. So maybe they would agree, and that's why you needed both Mishnahs. And Yashmin and Baha, if you had our Mishnah, same logic. If you started with the case of our case, one who was accepted like two, Baha ka'amar Rabbi Meir, you would think that's the only case that Rabbi Meir thinks you could change your mind about it. Aval Bahahi, but if you accepted the father, Rabbanan, since the father could be accepted in other cases, maybe they would agree that you can't change your mind. Tzricha. And therefore, the other Mishnah shouldn't bother us. So now, we have Rish Lakish who says Eido. We explained it's a case where one accepted it. The other side said, you can bring one witness, I'll accept it like two. And Rabbi Meir says, no, you can't. Yes, you can change your mind. And the rabbis say, no. It's a little different than the next Mishnah. We can resolve that. However, the Gemara says, Hamidikatani Resha, Dayano, V'Seifa Edav, Almadavka Katani. But the Gemara says, wait a minute. You think when it says Edav in the Mishnah, it means really Edo, singular? But that doesn't work with the wording in the Mishnah because it says earlier, Zeposel Dayano Shalzeh. That's singular form. And then it says Edav in plural form. So if it starts in singular and moves to plural, you can't say the plural was really meant to be singular. That doesn't work. So they reject Rish Lakish and they go to answer number 2. So now we're going to have to assume they canceled both witnesses. And all 3 explanations that we're going to go through now, well, 2 that we're going to go through today, the 3rd tomorrow, all going to go with you're actually disqualifying 2 witnesses, not 1. It's not Edo like Rish Lakish said. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Bebahu va'acher leposlan. So comes Rabbi Elazar and said, it's when I was against you in court, you have 2 witnesses, and I come with a friend of mine, and I say, we're going to disqualify your witness. Okay? No. Gemara says, what? How can I possibly disqualify your witness? Even if I brought someone else with me. Excuse me. Even if I brought another witness with me, I'd be nogea be'edut. I'm disqualifying your witness, and that has implications for me. Then you have no witnesses. No way could it be that. So they have to explain Rabbi Elazar a little better. Okay, he raised an issue. We don't know exactly what this means yet. So first we have Rabbi Elazar that we didn't understand. Rabbi Acha comes to explain to Rabbi Elazar, and now the Gemara needs to explain what Rabbi Acha was saying. Demai. What kind of ir? If it was, they wanted to raise, is like to raise a doubt, and say there's a problem here. If you wanted to say the guy's a gazlan, he's a thief, that's a classic case of someone who isn't accepted as a witness. If I testify with someone else that your witness is a gazlan, I'm clearly nogea b'davar. So it's as if there's one witness, and one witness can't knock out your witness. So if I want to say your witnesses are thieves, I will not be accepted. But I could say that there's a problem in the family lineage. Okay, for example, if you come from the lineage, if your witness comes from the lineage of slaves are not accepted in court, Canaanite slaves. So why would Rabbi Meir allow me to disqualify them? Well, Rabbi Meir savar, Hane amishpacha kamisade v'iu mimela kapasa. It's a fascinating thought. I'm testifying about the family. I'm not testifying directly about the witness. I'm testifying about the family. Now, once I testify about the family, it then affects this witness, right? I'm really talking about their parents or their grandparents or something like that. So because it's not direct, I'm not considered nogea b'davar. The rabbis obviously say the opposite, which is no. Rabbanan savar saf saf nogea be'edutohu. The rabbis say, what do you mean? In the end, it's disqualifying the witness that's against me. So even though it's indirect, I'm indirectly, right, causing the witness against me to be knocked out. Of course, I'm nogea b'davar. According to Rabbi Elazar, the way the Gemara understands Rabbi Elazar, that's the machloket. If it's me and someone else coming to testify, the litigant with another person testifying, the two of them against the witnesses of the other side, but against their family, which has ramifications for them, is that permitted or not? Third interpretation. Okay, and here there's total opposite gear. So who says what? And I'm not going to get into the other interpretation. I'm going to stick with one, but just so you know, there's two total opposite interpretations. There's a machloket b'shtei kitei edim, meaning you come to court and you say, I'm bringing two sets of witnesses. And then you bring the first set. Can I disqualify that first set? Because you have another set, right? So I'm really not nogea b'davar, because even if I knock out the first, you have a second. So Rabbi Meir savar tzarich levarer. Now this all has to do with the machloket we've seen earlier, and we're going to review it again, about when you say that, when you come to court, do you have to say everything the truth? Like, do you have to make sure before you come to court and say, I have two groups of witnesses, that you really have two groups of witnesses who are willing to come to court? So Rabbi Meir holds you do, which means that I can be certain that you're going to bring another group, which means I can knock out the first group because I'm not nogea b'davar, because you still have another group of witnesses. The rabbis say you don't have to. So when you bring that first group, who knows if you're going to bring the second group? Since you could come to court and say I'm bringing two groups, but if you in the end only bring one, it's fine. No one's going to hold you accountable for that. So like it won't look like a dishonest person, right? Rabbi Meir says you look like a dishonest person. You say you're bringing two, now you only bring one. We don't believe you now. Like you lose your credibility. And the rabbis, people say things that we don't take that seriously. So if then I can't cancel your first group of witnesses when they come, because maybe you won't even bring a second group. And then I'm nogea b'davar when I cancel your first. Aval b'kat achat, but if there was only one group of witnesses that you were bringing, divrei hakol eno yochol poslan, of course I can't cancel that one group. Amru lefanav Rav Ami v'Rav Asi. So now Rav Ami v'Rav Asi come before Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, this was, by the way, I wanted to just point out, this was brought by Rav Dimi in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, because the fourth answer is going to be Ravin, who brings a different answer of Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, a bit of a twist on this. So now Rav Asi and Rav Ami ask, what if there was only one group of witnesses? To which the Gemara says, what do you mean? We just said what? If there's only one group of witnesses, ha'amarta, you just said. Rabbi Yochanan just said. He just said, of course, you can't cancel one group. I know what their question was like this. You said you're going to bring two groups. You bring one, I disqualify it, which I'm allowed to do. But then when you bring your second group is disqualified. Now, right, by two other witnesses. Now, do we retroactively reinstate the group and not accept what I did? Because in the end, I was nogea b'davar. On the other hand, when I did it, I wasn't really nogea b'davar because I assumed there would be another group and I didn't think that they were going to be disqualified. So Amar Lahem, Rabbi Yochanan answers them, Kfar hi'idu aidim harishonim, which also has multiple interpretations, but we'll go with they already disqualified them and it wasn't nogea b'davar at the time, even though ultimately it became that now there's no witnesses for you. And you could Amri, some people say it wasn't Rabbi Yochanan who answered them, but Amar Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi answered the same answer, which is Kfar hi'idu aidim harishonim. And since they weren't nogea be'eduto at that moment, because they assumed another group was coming, I was believed to knock out your witness together with another one, right? The first group of witnesses, even though in the end you now have no witnesses. So now the Gemara suggests, that's the last thing for today, Nema beplugta derevi Rabbi Shimon kamiflage. Wait, if the machloket is tzarich levarer, we saw this machloket somewhere else. And Nema means we're going to reject this, though. Ditanya habali dom b'shtar b'chasakat. You come to court, this back to the third chapter of Bava Batra, which is you're supposed to have a shtar to prove you own land. But after 3 years, we assume you might have lost it, and the mice might have eaten it, and therefore we allow you to come and say, I've been eating, benefiting from the produce for the last 3 years, and therefore let me, that's going to be my proof. And we allow that. But if you come to court and you say, I'm bringing shtar and chazaka, I have both proofs in hand. Now here comes the tzarich levarer or not. Do you have to actually bring both? Okay? Do we make you bring the shtar really? Because the shtar is much stronger. So, nidon b'shtar, divrei Rebbe. Rebbe says, tzarich levarer, you have to be honest. If you come into court and say, I have a shtar, and then all of a sudden you don't produce it, you lose your credibility. Even if you bring chazaka, we're not going to accept it. And Rashbag Omer nidon b'chazaka. And Rashbag says, all you have to do is bring chazaka. Okay? And they think that Rashbag means you have to bring chazaka and not the shtar. So the Gemara says, Havina baba chazaka v'lo b'shtar. What do you mean? Shtar is much stronger. Well, what he meant is Ela'ema af b'chazaka. You could even bring just chazaka and kaim alam b'tzarich levarer. And they said that's the whole machloket. Rashbag says you don't need to. We don't care if in the end you don't bring the shtar. We don't take you so seriously when you say I'm bringing the shtar and a chazaka. You come into court and say that and then just bring chazaka. It's fine. Okay, so now we think it's the same machloket, to which the answer, no, it's not the same thing. Look, aliba de Rashbag kule amalo pligi. According to Rashbag, they don't disagree, meaning there's no way to actually reconcile both with Rashbag. Okay, in other words, what we're going to show is, though, according to Rebbe, you could see both Rabbi Meir and the rabbis. Why? Ki pligi aliba de Rebbe. Rebbe says sarich levarer, but perhaps Rebbe only says it in the case of shtar and chazaka, and Rebbe won't say it by us. Why is that? So the Rabbi Meir, who says sarich levarer by us, will for sure just say a whole like Rebbe, that fits perfectly. But Rabbanan, the rabbis who say by us, in sarich levarer, might not say the same thing in the shtar case. Rabbanan amr l'cha ad kan lo ka'amr Rabbi Hatam ela b'chazaka dimikoach shtara ka'ate. That's why I explained to you how chazaka works. Chazaka only works because we assume there was a shtar in the beginning. So if you come and say I have a shtar and then you don't, those two things are interrelated. And because of that, if you say you have both and you don't bring both, Rebbe says this isn't going to work. But they're the witnesses. One group has nothing to do with the other. It's true, the person said I'm bringing both, but the two are totally not interconnected. Afilu Rabbi Meir modeh de'ein sarich levarer. Maybe Rabbi Meir would say there, even though it's sarich levarer in the chazaka case, you might not need to in our case, and therefore you can't necessarily assume the machloket the same. Okay. End of the daf. We're going to get to the fourth interpretation tomorrow. But what did we do here? We started with these three machlokot, Rabbi Meir and the rabbis and the Mishna. How we choose judges. How can we disqualify judges? Can we disqualify witnesses without proper proof? Then we got to what exactly is the way of choosing judges. In the end, we figured out how to explain that. And what's the machlok? And we had to adapt a little bit that everyone thinks the third one's chosen also by the judges. The question is, are the Baalei Dinim involved or not? Then we got to this whole thing about how does Rabbi Meir allow you to disqualify judges? We said in the end it's not mumchim, but then how can you disqualify witnesses? And we have I'll just review quickly the three interpretations. Rish Lakish says it's Edo, one witness only. And then we had to explain what was the case, where he accepted one to be like two. Rabbi Elazar said he and another came to disqualify, which is also, by the way, what Rabbi Yochanan said. He and another came to disqualify, but the first one is psul mishpacha, which means they disqualified someone else, which had effects on the other one, and that was the machloket. And the third was, it was a case where the person was bringing two kitei edim, and then do we allow the Baal Din to be one of the two witnesses to disqualify? Because we could say they're not nogea b'davar, or do we say they might be nogea b'davar because the person said they're bringing two doesn't mean they have to bring two, and that was the whole machloket. Do they have to bring two, or do they not have to bring two? With that, we finish for today. I said a very interesting chapter. We're just getting started, and we'll see everyone tomorrow. Hoping for Psalot Tovot today.